What is missing from modern fantasy? Well, a lot apparently. I want it full of action and sex. I want both of those to be graphic. I just need more women committing crimes. Adult fantasy romance 30 plus. There's not a whole lot of it. Now, I found this incredibly interesting thread on Reddit called "What do you want a publisher are currently not providing?" And this user basically wrote, "I've been feeling alienated by the huge upswing in romantasy and cozy fantasy publications lately. I miss the classic political epic fantasy of the 90s and the grungy, grim, weird urban fantasies of the zeros. What are you missing from the current landscape?" Now, I just want to react to some of the comments because there's so many interesting things here. Now, while modern fantasy has become much more diverse and we have so many more subgenres, I don't think we're ever going to get to a place where we represent everything or where there will be something for every single reader on the world, or at least not in a very prevalent sense. But if I should answer this question, what do I think is missing from modern fantasy? I would say primarily, I would love to see more good fathers that are brilliant role models, that stick with their wives, love their children, and act honorably. Now, we do have some examples from fantasy and so on, but I wish that was more prevalent. Now, the second thing is that I would love to see more couples that have been married for a long time and are happily married. Now, myself, I've been married now for 5.5 years. Obviously, I haven't been married for 10 or 20 or 30 years, but I hate hearing a lot of people talk down about the fact of being married as something that doesn't give you lots of freedom or something that kind of ends your life. I've been married for 5.5 years, and genuinely, getting married has been the best decision of my life. I have loved being married, and I wish that was represented more in fantasy as well. But without further ado, let's get into some of the comments. Adult fantasy romance 30 plus. There's not a whole lot of it. They're mostly little 90-year-olds running around saving the world with their god-given power. And if they claim to be maybe 25, they still act 16 in my experience. Now, this is incredibly interesting, and I actually haven't read a lot of adult fantasy or romantasy, so I wouldn't really be able to tell you what is missing here, but it's definitely true that a lot of people do find their special ones or find romance in later stages in their lives. So I can totally understand that if you really enjoy romance in your novels, but everyone is very, very young or acts young, then you might feel slightly underrepresented. I want to feel like I'm eating at a local unique restaurant, not a franchise location. A lot of the writing I encounter, both trad and indie, now feels like it was forced to fit a certain cookie cutter. Sometimes it even seems like the author's individual ideas were warped to match certain pacing, writing style, and trope norms. Now, this is incredibly interesting because I think a big reason why this person probably feels this way is due to publishers really promoting like love triangle or coming of age story or cozy fantasy or whatever. They give us all of these labels, which there must be some data that actually labeling books differently works. Like if you remember, like 10 years ago, every single fantasy book in the world was compared to a Game of Thrones. Now, books are going to be compared to maybe Fourth Wing, or they'll have other labels on like Feud Romance, or I don't know. And while I don't have any data to back it up, I'm fairly certain that publishers will often go out looking for specific type of books that they want to publish. So the fact that this person kind of feels like a lot of books are cookie cutter books doesn't surprise me a lot. Now, this person does mention that it also feels like that in the indie sphere, but what I would say is that there generally seems to be a bigger diversity of different kind of subgenres and different things explored in the indie sphere. So if you're looking for something a bit more unique, then that's usually the place to go. The only challenge is that it can be hard to navigate the indie sphere because there's just so many books out there and a lot of the books don't have that many reviews. A future that's not dystopian. Now, I think every single futuristic book I have ever read has at least one dystopian element to it, or a lot of different dystopian elements to it. Now, I've heard that Becky Chambers, she actually writes futuristic novels that aren't dystopian, and I think Murderbot technically maybe isn't dystopian, but I kind of understand why a lot of novels have a dystopian feel, because that's a very easy way to create some tension or make you think differently about like how things have evolved. If things were just happy or as they are in today's age, it can be maybe more challenging for an author to actually create that tension. But yeah, future that's not dystopian, I'm totally here for it. I do kind of think that cozy fantasy is a bit of an answer to that. But the thing with cozy fantasy is that generally the stakes are very, very low. So we kind of maybe want a high-stake novel that also is set in a futuristic setting that isn't dystopian. If you have any recommendation that fits this criteria, definitely let me know and I might pick up some of them. And advance. I love that. Oh, I feel so bad for authors. It's a tough gig. Trees guys writes, I just want to point out that a lot of what isn't popular with publishers is still being written by indie authors. Give indies a try and you might find what you're looking for. Exactly my point. There seems to be less of this cookie cutter imitation kind of thing going on in the indie sphere, and yeah, there's definitely more subgenres that seem to be thriving in that industry. So yeah, definitely go check out indie books. Less movie directing. It feels like books lately are constant movie jump cuts from one action scene to another. I want characters interacting with each other, chilling, giving me time to care, so later on it's not just a unnamed companion 23 dying or succeeding, and I can have an emotional response to the events. I feel like books have become faster paced. Maybe it's due to TikTok or social media. I'm not really 100% sure what the reason is. But if you read some classic fantasy, so I've been this year making my way through Memory, Sorrow and Thorn by Ted Williams, the trilogy that inspired George R. R. Martin to write A Game of Thrones. And yeah, but that series definitely does not have a lot of jumping into the future or like movie directing. Almost every single scene and event leading up to the climax is described in a lot of details, and the author really allows you to chill with the characters. And I'll think a lot of classic fantasy has this. Also, if you think about Eye of the World or The Wheel of Time, for example, there are so many scenes where you just chill with the characters, and you could even argue for The Wheel of Time that a bit more movie directing would have been a good thing for that series. And then also Realm of the Elderlings, the pace is very, very slow. And yeah, I kind of can appreciate what this person here is saying. I think there is a place for both, like The Faithful and the Fallen kind of feels like it's movie directing, but it's one of my favorite series. But then also The Realm of the Elderlings, which is way slower paced and has a lot of the scenes where things don't jump around as much, is also one of my favorite series. What I would recommend this person if you're missing what you're looking for here, then going to some of the classic stuff is probably the way to go. But yeah, hopefully in the future we'll have more modern books that have more of these scenes that may seem unnecessary, but actually add a lot to the characters or the story or the pacing. I'm missing fantasy that has depth without being grimdark or glorying in depression. So many books these days are about bleak, depressing worlds and lives. I miss old school fantasies where people occasionally enjoyed their lives as well. With the rise of grimdark, the rise of nuanced and grey characters, that seems to be all the hype at the moment. In a lot of ways, I do think that the rise of grimdark and nuanced and grey characters is a net positive thing, because you could argue that grimdark and grey characters is just a realistic depiction of our real lives, because in the real life, people are nuanced, and the reality isn't all just rainbow and sunshine, but it is actually quite grim in parts. But what I would agree here is that not all modern fantasy should be grimdark or glorify depression and so on. While there's definitely a place for those kind of books, and I personally love grimdark, we also need to have books that do have settings that aren't overly grim. Again, I know I kind of mentioned this already, but cozy fantasy kind of seems to be like an answer or reaction to a lot of the grimdark we've had, but finding something that's a bit more in the middle is probably a good place to be as well. Horror set in a fantasy world, but ideally avoiding the more typical vampire/werewolf subjects. Basically an extended version of the chapters A Journey in the Dark or The Bridge of Khazad Dûm from Lord of the Rings would be the ideal. Onan Beast, doomed expeditions, and things lurking in the darkness. Now, if I can recommend one novel that I kind of think fits this, is Justice of Kings by Richard Swan, or the trilogy is called Empire of the Wolves. That novel, especially book 2 and 3, are almost straight up horror, but there's no vampire or werewolves in those kind of books. But yeah, I haven't read that many fantasy horror novels, but it's actually something I definitely want to dip my toes a bit more in. And I agree that while vampires and werewolves are great, it's also good to have a bit more diversity. So yeah, if you have any recommendations for me actually when it comes to fantasy horror, then definitely let me know. I need more 40 plus heroines. I recently read The Adventures of Amina al-Sarifi and realized just how badly I needed a middle-aged MC doing her thing, being all reluctant heroic and just kicking ass. They're always so young, it's hard to find any females under 30, much less over 40 in fantasy more often, but also in sci-fi. Now, this kind of relates to the first comment here about having romance with characters that are 30 plus, and here I totally agree. I can not really mention a character on top of my head where we followed an older female character. So that definitely seems to be a gap in the genre. Now, if there's one book I can kind of think about is the Bloodsworn Saga by John Gwynne. I think Orca, which is one of the protagonists, she's definitely a mom, and I'm not sure how old she is, but I wouldn't be surprised if she's late 30s or early 40s. So that's definitely one series I would recommend. But yeah, do you have any other recommendations that features 40-plus-year-old heroines? I would love to hear it. Secondary worlds that aren't populated by humans, societies that aren't obviously inspired by a particular Earth culture, just give me some more fantasy in my fantasy. Now, this is a great point, because one thing that is often a bit unrealistic with a lot of fantasy and also sci-fi is that when we encounter other races, they are eerily similar to human beings, which doesn't really make much sense, right? Obviously, if aliens or other races were on a different planet, we wouldn't expect them to be anything like humans, right? Now, if there's one author I kind of want to highlight here is Adam Jakowski. Again, I know we're not talking about sci-fi here, but the Children of Time trilogy has some incredible aliens that do not feel human at all. Traditional heroes who have strong, inviolable code and sense of justice. I'm very sick of lovable scoundrels, morally grey heroes, and anti-heroes. So we have already kind of touched on this. Now, I think the challenge, again, as I mentioned, is that if we have characters that are totally good or totally evil, they might not feel as realistic, because in real life there is more complexity on how we make moral judgments and so on. But there's definitely novels out there written where the character has a huge sense of drive. For example, Rage of Dragons. We also have Orca, as I mentioned earlier in this video, from the Bloodsworn Saga. But I totally agree with this comment here that having these characters that are totally good or totally bad is becoming less and less frequent. And in my opinion, I think that is a general good thing. But I also do acknowledge that not every single fantasy book needs to have morally grey characters, because that can also get very, very boring. I just need more women committing crimes. Yeah, another comment here about how women are maybe depicted too narrowly within fantasy. I think, again, with a lot of modern fantasy, that this is slowly being changed a bit. But yeah, women can also be vile, criminal, and really mean and so on, and can also be criminals. Yeah, I think it's just important to have both male criminals and female criminals. I can totally understand where this person is coming from. Sometimes I want high quality fantasy, but sometimes I crave fun trash, but good fun trash is impossible to find. I want lurid, graphic, unabashed pulp fantasy. I want it full of action and sex. I want both of those to be graphic. Give me something like The Witcher or Conan or Red Sonja, where the protagonist arrives at a new location, gets in a fight, F's wenches or dudes, uncovers a dastardly plot, kills the wizard, then rides off into the sunset. Oh, this comment definitely made me laugh. I love that. I can't really say for myself that this is what I'm looking for at all in my fantasy. But yeah, it's good to hear other perspectives on what people think is missing. I'm missing the Wheel of Time copycat style series. Sanderson and Islington are out there, but we should definitely have more. We got decades of Lord of the Rings copycats, so surely we were due to more Wheel of Time stuff with how much of a massive bestseller that series was. I'd love a new epic fan series with focus on large cast and world building, but a story that is not too dark in tone. Big publishers just don't seem interested in this stuff nowadays. Now, I've already made 2 videos called Epic Fantasy is Dying, so I'm not gonna talk more about that, but yeah, I think a lot of publishers now are kinda abandoning these big, epic, large-scale sagas reminiscent of Lord of the Rings and Wheel of Time, and yeah, hopefully that makes a comeback soon. But yes, I think I will leave this video here. The original thread had so many more interesting comments. Let me know if you want to follow up, and I'll leave the link to this thread in the description down below. Now, if you want to hear my full thoughts on the state of epic fantasy, then check out this video. Oh, you're still here and you want more? Well, the good news is that if you want more and you want to support me, then I do have a Patreon. Now, if you didn't know, then I have a Viking book club where every single month we read one book together, and you can be the one that can put the book forward. Last month we read this book, and this month we're reading this book. And at the moment we are trialing having Zoom book club discussions after everyone has read the book. So also, if you want to discuss a book with me and other like-minded people, then the Patreon is the way to go. Now, in addition to getting your name in my videos, joining the Viking book club, potentially getting art cards depending on what tier you are, I am also basically spending around 100% of my Patreon income to reinvest back into my channel. Since I launched my Patreon, I have had more than 30 videos professionally edited. And just to give you an example, from September 2023 to March 2024, I have spent more than $1,500 into video editing with the aim to consistently post high quality videos for you to enjoy. It is much appreciated.